Hello, everyone. This is Shane Lynn at MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Mark Christ. Mark is the Director of Adult Programming for the Central Arkansas Library System. He previously served as Community Outreach Director for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. He's an award-winning author. He's written numerous books and articles and co-authored and edited them as well. You may know him from Rugged and Sublime, as well as Civil War Arkansas, 1863 to 64. I would consider him one of the leading experts on the Civil War in Arkansas. He's a great friend of the museum. He's led our bus tours that we've had in the past of Civil War battlefields here in Arkansas. We hope to resume that after the pandemic is over. So welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for asking me, Shane.
Well, I gave a little brief introduction, but if you don't mind, would you mind tell us a little bit more about yourself and some projects that you've got coming up? I know you've been working on a book in the past, so another book.
Right. Okay, well, I am originally from northern Indiana. I've been in Arkansas since 1976. I was a professional journalist for 8 years. I worked for the Gazette, and my future wife worked for the Democrat. When we met each other, we realized that she would lose her job if her editor found out we were dating. So I left journalism shortly after that. Went to work for the Historic Preservation Program, where I was public information officer. I led the battlefield preservation program, and did a whole lot of other things. I retired from there after almost 29 years, and I have been at the Central Arkansas Library System since October of 2018, and I'm very happy to be here. I am, the pandemic put a serious kink in my plans for another book, which will focus on Arkansas in 1864 and 65. But right when I was getting into the heavy research is when everything shut down just about a year ago this week, I think. So we'll see where that goes. It's going to be a long-term project.
Well, speaking of the Civil War, how did you get interested in the Civil War?
Oh, well, what got me caught initially, when I was a kid, I was at a festival at a park in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this guy came riding up on a horse with a blue uniform and a sword, and I just just kind of caught my fancy. So I started reading about the Civil War, and it just kind of grabbed me. One of the great things about doing it in Arkansas, I think my first book came out about 25 years ago. There just hadn't been that much work done on the war in Arkansas, so it was really fertile ground to do some original research and writing.
And we're actually going to talk about the Camden Expedition, which is this month is the 157th anniversary of it leaving Little Rock and beginning. Could you give us an overview of Arkansas around 1864, what had happened and what was leading up to the expedition?
Okay. Well, really the key thing that had happened would have been in 1863. I think really the turning point for the Civil War in Arkansas was the Battle of Helena. At that point, Helena was about the only place that the Union had a toehold in Arkansas. There was some posts up in the northwest part of the state, but Helena was a key position. It was being used to help with the Vicksburg campaign. And when the Confederates attacked Helena on July 4 of 1863 and suffered a serious loss, that led to that gave the Union the opportunity to approach Little Rock. Also, of course, on July 4 of '63 is the day Vicksburg surrendered, which also idled a whole lot of Union troops to where Frederick Steele was able to get around 1,200 men and take Little Rock, which Little Rock was occupied by the Union forces on September 10 of 1863. That effectively exiled the major Confederate forces to the southern part of the state. The Union held a line, a tenuous line, but basically held the Arkansas River Valley, which sundered the Trans-Mississippi Confederacy, and the majority of the activity that took place on the north side of the river would be guerrilla actions and counter-guerrilla work. The Camden Expedition would be the last major military offensive undertaken by either side in Arkansas for the duration of the war.
So tell us about the Camden Expedition. What its purpose was, how it came about, if you would.
Okay, the Camden Expedition was basically the Arkansas leg of a larger operation, the Red River Campaign. In that, Steele's Federals were supposed to march through South Arkansas and then link up with a larger joint Army-Navy command under Nathaniel Banks at Shreveport. The goal was then to take this combined force and invade Texas and capture part of Texas. Part of the reason for that was because there was a lot of cotton in East Texas, and the textile mills in the northeastern United States were just clamoring for cotton so they could go back to work. It would also have met one of President Lincoln's ongoing war goals of putting the Union flag on the soil of another seceded state. So that was the basic background for this operation to take place.
And so it leaves Little Rock on the 23rd of March, 1864, and they're headed south.
Right. Yeah. So it was a two-pronged operation in Arkansas as well. Steele left out of Little Rock at the same time that Brigadier General John Thayer left Fort Smith with another column, and they were supposed to meet at Arkadelphia in southwest Arkansas, and then together march to Shreveport. So Steele left Little Rock, and he was not happy about being part of this operation. They did not have good supplies. The Union Army was poorly supplied, and he knew they were going into a region of the state that had been picked clean by the Confederate forces who lived down there. And he was also going to link up with an army led by Nathaniel Banks, who was frankly a really terrible general, probably one of the 5 worst Union generals of the Civil War. But he went ahead and did his duty. They went down, marched through to Arkadelphia, and waited there for a couple of days. By that point, his men were already down to half rations. When Thayer failed to show up, he still kept going. He continued to the Little Missouri River, crossed the Little Missouri at Jenkins Ferry on April 3, and then on the April 3 and 4, they fought a tough little action with Confederate cavalry there. But the Yanks held the ground, and the Confederates ended up falling back to Prairie du Chien, which is near modern-day Prescott. While they rested for a bit before heading on to Prairie du Chien, and Thayer finally showed up with his troops, but unfortunately they didn't have any supplies either. So now Steele had a much larger army with both men and animals in danger of starving because of a lack of forage and other provender. He moved on to Prairie du Chien. The Confederates had fortified the southern part of Prairie du Chien. There was a few days of skirmishing, and finally on the third day, Steele got his entire army into line of battle on Prairie du Chien, and they just marched forward as a group to the to attack the Confederate fortifications, which were about a mile and a half long. And when they got there, they found that the Confederates had fallen back to protect their capital at Washington, Arkansas, in Hempstead County. So this was really the turning point of the Camden leg of the journey. Steele had learned at that point that that Banks had already been defeated at Mansfield and another battle whose name escapes me at the moment in Louisiana, and he was in retreat with his extensive naval component in danger of being trapped in low water. So Steele, his army was starving. He didn't see much value in continuing into Louisiana, where he would be part of, possibly getting bagged with Banks's army if that happened. So he turned toward Camden on the Washita River, thinking that there might be, some additional supplies there. The Federals got to Camden on April 15 and occupied the town. There was some looting that initial evening, but then they got disciplined down pretty well for the occupation. But they were starving. They didn't have food for the men or for the 12,000 horses and mules that were along. So on the 17th of April, they learned that there was a stash of, I think, 5,000 bushels of corn west of Camden. So they marched. They sent out a foraging detail to seize that and anything else they could find. When they got there, the rebels had managed to burn about half of the corn, but they went ahead and loaded the wagons with the rest of the corn, and then just kind of scattered through the area and just basically took whatever they found. They were taking children's clothing as well as food and tools and things. So they were heading back to Camden on April 18 when they arrived at Poison Spring. Now, Confederate General John Sappington Marmaduke's had learned that they were there, so he had set up an L-shaped ambush on the Camden to Washington road, and basically stopped the wagon train and proceeded to attack it repeatedly. Now, the one of the regiments in the Union Party, foraging party, was the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry Regiment. They were rushed to the front of the wagon train, and they fought off 3 separate attacks before a well-coordinated charge of the Confederates overran them. They were low on ammunition. A lot of their officers had been shot down. There was pressure all along the Union line. I believe it was the 18th Iowa was with them. They were forced back too, and basically the Union force just kind of crumbled. And that's when the nightmare began for the 1st Kansas. As Confederates roamed the battlefield afterwards, they killed a lot of wounded and surrendered soldiers of the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry Regiment. One of the federal or Confederate regiments was out of Texas, and they had fought against the 1st Kansas the preceding summer at Honey Springs in the Indian Territory, and come out second best. They were beaten in that battle, and the 1st Kansas had captured their flag, which is a great disgrace for a Civil War regiment. So they were among the troops who killed the surrendered and wounded Kansans. Also, the Tandy Walker's Choctaw Brigade was particularly brutal to the soldiers of the 1st Kansas, and the previous, actually, I think it was in February of '64. in the Indian Territory, the 1st Indian Home Guard had been sent down into the Choctaw Territory, where they had proceeded to basically murder a whole lot of Choctaw men, with the rationale of their commander being that if they haven't joined our army, then they're obviously with the others. So that could have led the Choctaws to be particularly savage in their attack on the 1st Kansas. Survivors got back to Camden. Still waiting for food. On the 20th, a wagon train arrived from Pine Bluff with many wagons full of food, which was great. And that led to Steele to think that Pine Bluff might be an avenue of supply for his army. So he sent the wagon train back the next day. On the morning of April 25th at Mark's Mills, the Confederates, a large force of Confederate cavalry attacked the Union wagon train. It was a 3-pronged attack, savage fighting. In the end, the Confederates under James Fleming Fagan were victorious. It was the signal victory of the Confederacy in the Trans-Mississippi, I think. Of around 1,600 Union troops who were involved, there were 1,500 casualties. The bulk of them were captured, but it was a disaster for the Union. They lost even more wagons, more horses, a lot of men, and that led Steele to realize that he needed to cut his losses while he still had an army to save. So on the 26th, they stole a march on the Confederates, quietly snuck out of Camden, and started heading back to Little Rock. So the Confederates were nipping at their heels on the way, but finally caught up with them on the 29th of April near what is now modern-day Leola. And on the evening of the 29th, Steele's army was in the Saline River bottoms trying to get to the crossing at Jenkins Ferry. The weather was ghastly. It was pouring down rain. The men were basically standing, leaning against trees to try to sleep because they couldn't lay in the water. But Steele put a pontoon bridge across the Saline, got all of his wagons and cavalry across, and then left a infantry rear guard to protect the bridge as the rest of the army got across. So up to this point, pretty much all of the Confederate action had been undertaken by the cavalry, but General Edmund Kirby Smith had decided, after basically turning Banks back in Louisiana, that he would march his infantry up into Arkansas and capture Steele's army. So these 3 divisions of Confederate infantry, after a forced march from the Red River in Louisiana, got to the field at Jenkins Ferry on the morning of the 30th. The terrain at Jenkins Ferry was such that there was a very narrow avenue from which the Confederates could attack. So instead of being able to use his superior numbers, Kirby Smith had around 7,500 men involved. There were maybe 4,000 Yankees fighting at Jenkins Ferry. But they could only attack piecemeal. So I believe that the Arkansas Division attacked first under Thomas Churchill. They got down to the Union lines, which was just, they were in basically a boggy, swampy area where they could barely get around. Churchill was defeated and driven back, after which the Missouri Division under General Mosby Parsons attacked, met a similar fate. They did get some artillery into action, and this is where one of the other racial atrocities of the Camden Expedition took place. I believe it was Ruffner's Missouri battery was in line, lined up against the 29th Iowa and the 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry, the sister regiment to the 1st Kansas that had been so poorly treated at Poison Spring. Well, the Kansas troops charged, screaming "Poison Spring!" They overran the battery. The Confederates were trying to surrender, and the Kansans started bayoneting them as they tried to surrender. Probably all of those men would have been killed if some of the men of the 29th Iowa hadn't intervened. So Parsons Missourians are defeated and driven back. The final attack is by Walker's Texas Division. Again, they meet a similar fate. 2 of their brigadiers are killed on the field. Another one is badly wounded. At the end of the day, the Union Army successfully crosses the Saline River. They cut their pontoon bridge to bits, so that the Confederates can't get across the water, and continue their retreat toward Little Rock. So that was the 30th. The area they went into was just a vast mud pit. What mules were left were starving. Some of them just dropped dead in the mud. One soldier said sometimes you see just their ears sticking out of the mud. A lot of the Union wagon train was burned in that area there, but ultimately they found their way back to Little Rock and arrived there on May 3rd, and that was the end of the Camden Expedition.
How was Steele, I guess, treated by the superiors, his superiors, or how did they feel that he performed during the?
Well, he during the campaign, he underwent some criticism. The Frontier Division out of Fort Smith was very unhappy with him because of Poison Spring. They had wanted to send some reinforcements when they could clearly hear the firing from out there, but he wouldn't send it. So and thus the 1st Kansas, didn't get any relief there. Steele was, I don't think he got quite as much criticism as Banks did, because Banks had was in overall all command, and really the entire Red River campaign, both legs of it was, I think William Tecumseh Sherman said, it was one damn blunder from beginning to end. And that pretty much defines it. Steele will remain in command in Arkansas until the fall. In October, I believe, Sterling Price manages to march a Confederate army through Arkansas, sneaks it past Steele's troops, and invades Missouri. Which that ultimately was the crowning disaster for the Trans-Mississippi Confederacy. But that led Union officials to say, okay, Steele, it's time for you to not be in charge of the 7th Army Corps in Arkansas. And he ended up going to fight in the Mobile campaign. And Frederick Steele was a much better commander of troops in the field than he was an administrator, I think.
What would you say would be the lasting impact of the Camden Expedition in Arkansas?
Well, for one thing, it pretty much led to stasis from that point on. The Yanks tended to stay in their fortified positions in Little Rock, Helena, Pine Bluff, Fort Smith, outside of doing some excursions out to fight guerrillas, basically. For the Confederates, it was a shot in the arm. They had pretty much been being defeated at every turn throughout the war up to 64. In 1864, they couldn't seem to go wrong until of course Sterling Price went on his disastrous raid. The other thing probably is that the racial component was that much more obvious. The atrocities that took place on both sides. Oh, I had forgotten to mention that after the Battle of Jenkins Ferry, there were other 2nd Kansas colored troops who went around and murdered wounded Confederates. So it was really a tit for tat thing. But that divide had become that much clearer. One Texan said that after the Camden Expedition, the war in Arkansas became war to the knife.
Well, and also moving toward the future, later after the war, and a lot of work has gone into preserving the battle sites of the Camden Expedition.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you had some work in helping that. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, in my previous life with the Historic Preservation Program, one of the greatest projects that I was able to be part of was working with the folks in Camden with the Nevada County. I'm sorry, Camden, Prescott with the Nevada County Depot and Museum. They worked to preserve parts of Elkins Ferry and Prairie du Chien. They got a preservation plan by working with the American Battlefield Protection Program. And then when land came available at Elkins Ferry, they managed to raise enough money to buy 400 acres of it, which was, really, that was, since the founding of the National Military Parks, that was probably the biggest battlefield land acquisition that we had seen. That led to an individual, a gentleman from he was a Prescott native who's I think he's an optometrist down in Texas, but he owned around 800 acres of the Prairie du Chien battlefield, including a lot of the area where a lot of the first days fighting had taken place. Well, he made the incredibly generous offer to sell that 800 acres at half the assessed value. And the folks at Camden, sorry, I keep saying Camden, folks at Prescott, who had, already successfully raised the money for Elkins Ferry, went ahead and did the same thing and acquired that land. I think it was 2015 that the land was turned over to the folks at Prescott. Since then, they have been developing the battlefield as a tourist attraction. They did get some wayside exhibits put up this past year, I understand, and it really is. Both of those battlefields are just magnificent landscapes. They look. Well, at Prairie du Chien, if you could ignore the interstate highway that's immediately adjacent to it, it looks like it looked in 1864. And you can just picture that, that Union Army spread out across the prairie, just a magnificent sight.
Yes, it was one of the highlights of our tour that we took. We took a bus tour of the Camden Expedition that you led, and that was they've done a lot of good work down there. And well, thank you, Mark, for talking with us about the Camden Expedition, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. And you have a great day.
You do the same. I look forward to the day we can go do another tour together.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, take care.